Now, Senator Carr, do you have anything in agricultural policy?
May well cover the meat industry if I could do it now, because it does go to the...
Well, I yield to the Labor Party for 20 minutes.
Thank you. Now, look, I'm interested in an article that appeared in The Australian the 15th of May 2017. Mr Tricky Forrest is reported to have said that he was concerned about the live export of cattle as opposed to domestic processing, which he said would see 95% of value-adding benefits disappear. Is the department aware of that comment?
We almost had a lengthy discussion about this last night when the Meat Processors R&D Corporation was here. That was the question.
You'd be enjoyed to know I wasn't here then. But,
well, I'm just saying the issue came up several times yesterday, and I think all of those present at the time were aware of the media article.
Sure. Is the department aware of that? I want to go to policy question for the department, if I could, please. Yeah. Has the department had any policy conversations on this issue?
No.
So I take it then you haven't undertaken any modelling on the economic benefits opposed to in terms of the live export trade?
Well, it's just a media article, Senator. It's not a...
No, that live export trade. Have you had any modelling on that within the department?
I would have to, not in my time as CEO, but there may well have been some...
When was the last time modelling was undertaken there?
Well, we'd have to take that on notice. There may well have been some
that's fine.
in the past,
Yes. Yeah. And I'm interested to know what, in the department's view, was required to actually maintain the national herd size. What's the...
favourable seasonal weather conditions.
Yeah. But given the circumstances at the moment, what are the impediments to maintaining the national herd sizes at this time?
Well, the price of the key issue is always going to be the relative profitability of beef over alternative land uses, given the seasonal conditions at any point in time. So, at present, ABARES talked about this earlier today. ABARES is projecting a reduction in beef production over the next 2 years, I think, while the number of females in the herd is increased as people respond to the higher beef prices. But at some point, the growth in the herd will hit some ceilings because of seasonal conditions and the relative profitability of beef as against sheep meat and cropping and so on. So there's not any one ideal number, Senator. The
concern that Mr. Forrest, though, has argued is that he expressed the view that it'd be alarmed if the government encouraged Mrs. Reinhardt in her live export master plan to smooth the path to a massive live export trade to China may in any way be considered, given how detrimental it would be on our own economic and agricultural growth. Is that a view that the department has given any consideration to?
Well, we've never seen any such proposal other than in the media, Senator, and we don't analyse and study every proposal that we read about in the media. Mm-hmm. Those are very large numbers. Quite difficult to envisage how that kind of scenario could come into being in anything other than the very long term. And then there would be a whole range of commercial and operational and trade issues that would be relevant, but at the moment there's no such proposal.
No such proposal. I want to be clear about this. You're suggesting that scenario is unlikely to develop?
Well, all I'm saying, everybody who I have heard comment on it, including Mr. Forrest, has only seen media reports. We've seen nothing more than that. Mm-hmm. And they were very ambitious, but also raised a whole lot of questions about the practicality of the proposal. That's not to say the media article is wrong, just that there's been nothing with any detail or no sort of credible proposition put to government, as far as I know.
Right, well, that's fair enough. Nothing is before government on that matter, and nothing you're aware of is
correct.
Envisaged.
Well, I can't say what's envisaged by some of the identities involved in this, but we certainly have no knowledge of any such proposal other than that one media article.
Fair enough. No,
you're
that's a
referring to.
just
Yeah.
straight response. That's fair. I'm particularly interested in the question of the regulatory impacts in terms of industry support and the role the department plays in overall costs for Australian meat producers. Do you have a particular role in that matter at all? Do you do any policy work in that area at all?
If you're just referring specifically to meat processors,
Yes.
they're part of our R&D system that we talked about earlier. So I can't recall the precise contributions, matching contributions that we make to
Yes.
R&D spent by the Australian Meat Processors R&D Corporation. We can probably find that number for you as I speak. That's our most direct engagement, R&D. There, but we're also involved, obviously, in consultations with MLA on the meat industry strategic plan and the activities of RMAC, which is the body that coordinates red meat policy across the industry and government.
Yeah, but I'm trying to get to the issue about the department's role in that process. I know you've indicated to the R&D Corps have a role. Does the department have a role in terms of policy setting?
We have no regulatory we have no regulatory role, and we have no necessary policy influence over commercial decisions that beef enterprises make about processing domestically as against live export.
And no independent capacity, research capacity?
Only the one I mentioned, which is matching funds into MLA and the Meat Processors Corporation.
Okay, it's been put to me that the regulatory burden in terms of the industry is around 19% of processing costs. Would you have any way of assessing whether or not that's an accurate proposition?
They are Australia. We're now talking about Australia's largest food manufacturing enterprise.
Yes.
With a very large workforce operating in.
So this is not wages. This is the regulatory burden.
You know, I'm coming to that.
Yeah.
I'm just pointing out that it's a very large industry, very large workforce. A pretty high occupational health and safety risk profile, I would suggest, operating in a very large number of enterprises ranging from very large down to quite small. So it is the kind of business, I think, where you would expect quite a large regulatory overheads. As to whether they're appropriate or not, I couldn't say. We've not studied it. But I'm not surprised it would be a large number because it's a very large food manufacturing industry.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are matters that the Commonwealth does have responsibility for, but I'll come to that in a moment because in terms of meat inspection role. The question though of health certificates, for instance, I was at a Meatworks recently in New South Wales where we were told that the cost for health certificates had increased for New South Wales producers from $12 to $45 over the past 18 months. Would you be familiar with those types of increases in regulatory burdens?
If they're associated with our export certification service, then that is a cost recovery service that we provide.
Yes.
I'm not sure whether that one particular one is.
So can you confirm whether or not that figure is accurate?
I'd have to take that on notice.
Yeah, fair, I expect that, but I'm saying to you, that's the figure that's been put to me at a recent visit to an abattoir in New South Wales. Now, if you wouldn't mind, I'd ask you to confirm
that,
what the increase has been. And has there been any increase in inspection services more generally? Is that the only increase in terms of health?
Well, we provide export certification services in accordance with the requirements of the importing country, and the requirements of importing countries do change from time to time. So, again, I'll have to take that on notice as to whether there have been any changes recently, but I think they do change, as I say, in response to the requirements of our export destinations.
Thank you. Well, if you could, I'd appreciate that. Is the department aware of any complaints from producers about the inflexibility of hours and charges relating to inspection services?
I think we regularly get I
complaints
don't
of
know
that
if I'd
type.
call them complaints, but I think we regularly get concerns about the difficulties in managing our requirements with a relatively small number of people, sometimes operating in remote locations with the commercial objectives of the processing plant. So yes, there are regular concerns.
It's been put to me that there's a waiting period of up to 2 months to appoint or terminate inspectors. This is not in remote locations. This is in quite accessible regions in New South Wales. Are you aware of that?
I'm not sure about termination, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if that was the case for recruitment, because they are a small cohort of people who have quite a high average age, and I think we have had a lot of difficulty recruiting people to provide these services. So I'm not surprised by that. As to termination, I'm not sure what the issues are there, but again, I'd have to take that on notice.
Would you please? And what is the list of what's your understanding of the level of shortage? Then, if you're saying it's a shortage of meat inspectors,
I don't have a precise knowledge of that.
I'm going to take that on notice again. I've asked that. This is a Commonwealth responsibility, isn't it?
The group, the people. Yes, it is. The people who deal with this in the department are those who were here when we first spoke yesterday morning. Yeah.
Yes, and see, it's put to me, this is, and producers were suggesting to me, it was a surprise to them, given that there have been plant closures in New South Wales, yet the claim was that there were shortages of meat inspectors. And the two propositions didn't really sit side by side.
My impression is that we always have a shortage of meat inspectors.
So what control does the department have over inspection services?
Well, it's our regulatory responsibility.
So why isn't there more flexibility in the service then?
Look, we're getting to a level of detail I'm not sure about.
Would you take that on notice?
Yes, I'll have to do that.
Clearly, I'm taking an interest in this matter, so you may want to. Now, I'm told that in the case of United States and Brazil, these are inspection services are actually funded through government. Is that the case?
That may very well be so. We have a policy and practice of cost recovery for our export certification.
So does that place
services.
Australian producers at a disadvantage?
All else being equal, yes it would. But all else, of course, is not equal.
So has there been any consideration within the department about reducing the cost of the regulatory burden for Australian producers?
As to whether these services should be cost recovered or not, that would be a policy matter for the government. And as to whether the cost of the services is reasonable and the services themselves are provided in an efficient way, that matter, I think, is more or less continuously under review. Excuse me. And there was a review undertaken, I think, last year of the efficiency of our services for both plant certification and meat certification, where people in the industry had an opportunity to contribute to that review. I don't know if that review has been made public. I'm pretty sure it has been provided to the meat industry. They were certainly.
Well, can you take that on note? And if the copy can be tabled, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah.
Is it the case that the department has had representation in regards to the cost of energy increases for meat processing?
No,
You've had no representation on that issue?
No, we discussed this earlier. We didn't have anybody who was aware of that.
Okay. Now, look, in regard to the trade agreements that have been struck, is it the department's responsibilities?
That's a new group of people, Senator. So.
Oh, I see.
This is the question we were asking earlier. What are we up to here? So if we're moving on to.
Yeah, look, it's a simple proposition.
Moving on to trade policy. We'll get the right people to the table.
That will see me out if I can get some advice on this matter. I'm interested to know what the process is for the establishment of protocols Well, sorry, it was in the... Yeah, but if that's... Do you want me to wait
Yes,
on that?
well, our understanding is we were going to do sugar, and then we finished, and then on to trade. But
Senator Carr, we're just going to go to Senator McCarthy to finish this part. Then we can send we can send agricultural policy home, and then we can move into trade and market access. Right, Senator McCarthy.
I won't be long, Senator. Mr Quinlivan, just with the process to develop the sugar code, or Minister, did the Minister seek advice from the department as to the impact of the code?
Fran Freeman, Senator, First Assistant Secretary, Agricultural Policy Division.
Yep.
The code was actually developed by the Treasury, and that was done in consultation with our department, and so Treasury were guiding the discussions, and we obviously worked with the Treasury, and I presume the officers had conversations, but you would need to talk to them.
To Treasury?
So the Treasury were leading the development of the code, and we did discuss that matter with them on a number of occasions.
So was information provided to the Minister about the impact of the code?
We were engaged with the Minister's Office on a number of occasions on elements of the code as it was being developed.
And any impact concerns?
Well, there was a number of issues as it was developed, obviously, that were being considered as the code was being discussed, and obviously the legal elements were being developed. So there was a fair bit of toing and froing on the elements of the code.
Yep. So do you want to give us some examples of what those concerns were?
I think that, well, just trying to think.
Well, okay, so this was something that was considered by Cabinet, so we were part of the Cabinet process around that, and we wouldn't normally talk about our advice in that context.
Well, what were the dates when this was happening?
On the 29th of March, the Treasurer and the Deputy Prime Minister announced the code, and it actually came into effect on the 5th of April. And I'd have to... We were obviously working on that matter...
5th of April, was it? Did you
the
say?
5th of April,
Yep.
it came into effect, Senator, yes.
Yep. So have there been any unintended consequences identified with the code?
Not at this time, Senator. I should say there is a review that's foreshadowed within the code within 18 months. So should there be, and I would say should there be, that none have been identified at this time, that they could be considered in the context of the review, which is due to take place after 18 months.
After 18 months?
So the review, yeah, there's a review scheduled, yes.
But at this point, there's no unintended consequences that have been
No, so the
identified?
code has come into effect, but it hasn't actually been utilised at this time.
What does that mean?
So no one has... So the code really relates to the ability for the relevant parties to reach agreement on different elements. And so it really in particular goes to whether there is arbitration between the parties and they can enact the code, if you like, to do that. And to date, that has not happened.
So no one's enacted it? Is that what
So
you're saying?
no one has sought to take action under the code at this time.
And if there is that review after 18 months, who would review it?
That would be, the Treasurer would be responsible for that, and in consultation with the Minister for Agriculture and Water Resources.
Okay, all right. Can I just ask, just in relation, and I know, Mr Williamson, you said that there was a Cabinet discussion and that there are confidential processes that surround Cabinet, but I'd just like to ask, in terms of advice provided to Cabinet, was that around the 29th of March?
It was prior to that. I think that was the point. The ministers announced, the Treasurer and the Deputy Prime Minister announced the code on the 29th. So there's been
So it would have been
government processes in the lead up to that.
Yeah. Can you just give us some dates of when that might have
I
been?
don't think we have that. We can happy to take that on notice.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Senator McCarthy. So that now completes questioning to agricultural policy, correct? Yep. And we'll now move to trade and market access, Mr Quinlivan. Senator Carr.
This won't take long. I'm just interested to know, In terms of these trade agreements that have been struck, what is the process by which protocols are put in place to allow Australian producers market access to any particular country? Who's responsible for the development of those protocols?
Louise Van Moos, First Assistant Secretary of Trade and Market Access Division. It depends on the particular protocol you're discussing. So you can have a bilateral agreement with a particular country to allow our exports into that country without a free trade agreement. The issues around the free trade agreement are trying to make that agreement more competitive. So they're trying to drop the tariffs down to a level that makes it more competitive for Australian product. If you're talking about actually getting access into that country based on some technical requirements, then it's the Department of Agriculture and Water Resources. If you're talking about the lead on free trade agreements, it's the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade.
So I'm interested to know what this department's role is in the development of those protocols. You've mentioned the
Well, it's our
technical side of it.
responsibility.
Sorry?
It's our responsibility.
Yes,
Yeah.
the technical side of it. So in terms of market access arrangements, particularly in regard to behind border restrictions, who's
So-
responsible for dealing with that issue?
So again, it depends on what you're talking about when you're talking about behind the border issues. If it's to do with a technical issue, such as a country requiring that we're free of a particular disease in Australia, then it's the Department of Agriculture and Water Resources. If it's about a specific technical side of how much weight you need in a particular orange juice, then, depending on the issue, it might well be the Department of Industry, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. So again, it depends on the non-tariff measure we
Okay,
call
so
them.
is there a schedule I can find somewhere that explains this?
We can provide that on notice.
Would you?
There's yes.
And and could you provide on notice what protocols you have negotiated for which countries in regard to the meat industry?
We can. The meat industry has many exports to many countries, and depending on which part of the meat industry you're talking about.
Yeah, well, the broad range, I'm interested, obviously, there's the beef. I mean, I take it by, let's say, the beef, pork or white meat. Would that be the categories you normally use? How do you divide it?
It depends on which country. So the beef industry has got a lot of access into countries such as Japan, China, Korea, the United States. So they're probably some of the biggest markets. And then if you go into issues around dairy, then it depends on what type of dairy we're talking about.
I'm interested in the meat industry at the moment rather than dairy.
Red meat.
Red.
Yeah.
So do you do it on the basis of red or white meat? What's your categorisations?
Beef is a good categorisation, but again, it would depend on...
And you do lamb, is it separate?
Lamb is separate, yes, and it also depends on what country that particular country,
Okay.
what
So what I'm
protocols
interested
those
to know
countries
is
have.
what protocols you have negotiated with the major ones you've got, and in what sectors of the meat industry they cover.
Yep.
Is
We
that
can
possible
provide
to take
that. I
that on
mean,
notice?
the meat industry, for example, goes to most countries in the world, a large proportion of the countries, but it depends also,
Thank you.
is it competitive where they're actually exporting to those countries?
And do you facilitate trade missions? Or is that, who's responsible for the facilitation of trade missions?
Do you mean our Australian delegations?
For
going
Australian
to-
producers?
What sort of delegations, Senator? Because
For Australian
there are industry,
meat
there are
producers,
state
who organises
government,
those?
there's a very wide range of trade delegations. Some of them we're involved in quite a lot, some not at all. So I'm just
I'm
trying to...
particularly interested in terms of market access questions. Now, in a previous life, I've actually been part of organising delegations for Australian manufacturers. I'm interested to know, what do you do for meat manufacturers in terms of international exports? What's the role of this department in that process?
So, for example, but it's an example, we have 16 councillors throughout the world. Those councillors are located in specific countries because of the potential and the current export market access we have for beef. and for other commodities.
So can I get a list of those, please, and where those councillors are based?
Yes, and so those councillors do quite often work with, obviously Canberra, but they're located in those countries. They'll work with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Austrade, depending on what that particular delegation wants to see and do. It might be a combination of the different departments in those countries helping them either to market their product, to find new importers, depending on help to try and deal with a particular issue. So it depends on what they're going, why they're going, and the ag councils often are helping the agriculture industries in those circumstances.
I see. And do you work with the Department of Industry at all in this matter? You mentioned before there were some aspects which are the responsibilities of the Department of Industry.
If the Department of Industry is in country, or if a particular issue is relevant to the industry that wants to go on those delegations, then we'll link in with the Department of Industry. We do have a relationship with them, but it's depending on what the particular issue is.
I'll come back to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.